So it was a great job, but just again hit that kind of ceiling of family members that were all
Yeah.
in upper management. And so
Yeah.
went to work for another guy, and I was with him for about 2 years. And that was a really good experience because these other two companies were like really structured, and which was great. This third company was not. It was a dude who was just a single owner, and there was only three of us that worked in the company. So we were a four-man show, and it was just kind of like Wild West, right? Which was fun. We had a lot of fun, and we did massive projects. I mean, we would just bring in temp labor, and we would do, we would do a lot for a small company. But I really kind of got a good example of like these two worlds. And so while I'm working for him, actually, just rewind just a bit. While I'm working for the last company, right before I decided to quit, I got saved.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah.
which is a whole other podcast in itself. But I get saved. I'm working for that second company, and again, kind of hit that ceiling. Shift over to this other company now as a Christian, and just start working for this guy. And he certainly wasn't, but he was a good employer. He was a good boss. Took care of us, and so during this time, I'm recently saved. Well, I start getting discipled by this pastor. This is down in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this pastor actually, his family are farmers historically, right? They're immigrants from Germany, had been in the country since like the 1800s. And so they had amassed all this land down in Albuquerque, or down in Las Lunas, which is just outside of Albuquerque. And our church was out there, kind of in the country. He lived out there, close to the church. Him and I just become best of friends. And so one afternoon, after church, we're walking around in this land that they own, and it's all farmland. And, we just have this wild idea that we're going to start a farm. And so that was actually the first business I started. So we started a farm. And
Gotcha.
I literally quit my job in the industry. I was kind of burnt out too at that point. I was 10 years in, 12 years in, something like that.
Yeah.
And him and I just say, let's do this. And that business did really well. It was timed really well by God's grace. It was kind of like when the whole Know Your Farmer, Buy Local movement was happening.
Awesome.
And Las Lunas is a bedroom community to Albuquerque. And so, it's 30 minutes away. So we were able to kind of start this farm. First year we sold produce only. Second year we got into chickens. Third year we got into livestock. And so by the time I got out of that business, and I'll kind of rewind here in just a second to when I started Catalyst, we were doing 200 head of cattle a year. Now we were finishers, so we could bring on, we connected with a bunch of ranchers from like southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. We would basically grab their lot, right? They would sell us their cows off of the range. Basically, we would bring them on, finish them for 6 months, and then sell them, into a co-op that we were part of, or private buyers, right?
Would you grain finish them or grass?
Grass, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And so we, because we were Las Lunas is south, right? And so our season would go a little bit longer. But part of our deal was, grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
And so bringing them on, we could call them grass-fed beef. We never fed any grain. And so that's we probably had about 4,000 chickens at that point, just all free range, running around everywhere. I've got some wild videos of that. And then we, of course, just kept growing the produce side. Well, after the first season of farming, we hit the winter time, and this is before we had livestock, and I was just kind of hanging out. I'm like, man, it's winter. There's nothing to farm during the winter.
Yeah.
So that's when I decided to start Catalyst. I had already actually got my contractor's licenses. I was sitting on those for a couple of years, maybe a year, and so I just started reaching out to some of my former contacts from the industry and letting them know that, hey, I'm here if you need anything done. And it just took off. And, I would say, number one, God's gracious and kind to bring opportunity. But number two, when you do a good job and work hard, people remember that, And so all these years that I had worked for all these contractors for these other companies. Now, one thing I didn't do was call a single customer. Like, I didn't call any of our former customers, right?
Right.
It was just like I would reach out to a GC and, like such and such, let's say Foreman would text me just through our network and say, hey, I'm now working for this new GC. So it's like, okay, cool, I'll call that guy. And then, but sure enough, you do that a few times. Next thing you know, you're getting phone calls, right? Because it's like, oh, Adam's, opened his own company. And so
Yeah.
that's how Catalyst started, man. To me, actually, I didn't ever think it would be my main business. I just started it because it's what I knew how to do.
Gotcha.
And quite frankly, it was just that. It's like, look, I've mastered this trade. I know everything there is about it. I can do it really well. I'm pretty good with people, and I think I could do this. And so that was the long and short of it. And I was a one-man operation. You know, I would bring in temp help from time to time if I had something that was too much for me. And that's where it started. And so I was actually running that business while running the farm, and both of them started to grow, right? And so it kind of came to a point where we had to pick between one or the other.
Gotcha.
And, you know, that also coincided with some other stuff that was going on. And so the logical conclusion for us, my wife and I, was let's run with Catalyst. That seems like that's going to be the best decision, you know, for our family, for our future. And so at that point, I actually stepped away from the farming business, kind of, you know, just went full bore into Catalyst. And shortly thereafter is when we started the Denver branch. And yeah, just 8 years building there, and it's continued to grow. And so, you know, a bit of a long-winded question, or answer to your question, but I think it's important because, you know, I was able to do that because I stuck with the trade.
Yeah.
You know, and I got to a place where I had to a degree mastery of the trade.
Absolutely.
You know, and then through sticking with the trade, building up a network of contacts.
Totally, yeah.
And then just having at that point the kind of the guts to just say, let's do this and see what happens. You know, and here's what I would say, like, what's the worst that can happen? It just doesn't work. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You know, you're no worse off than when you started. I mean, maybe if you invest some capital, that's kind of tough.
Right.
But again, at the beginning, it's really not, because it's, you know, you've got your truck and you've got your tools.
Yeah.
And, you know, you already have that anyway, because that's what you need to work, right? And when you win a job, well, then you go and you purchase materials. And so, you know, and you're using funding from the project to do that. So it's
You're really not losing
no, you're not
much,
dude.
per se.
Not necessarily, you know. And so now if your job goes sideways and you do poorly, yeah, sure. But so, you know, that's kind of how it all started, man.
Awesome. Good stuff, yeah. I think that's good to hear, because for a lot of people, myself included, where it was like, my first business was shoe cleaning.
Nice.
I cleaned shoes. And it was like a moment where I don't know if I think I was sitting in youth group or something. I was thinking about other things besides what we were discussing. So
that's funny. You're like, I got to get the FZ 150.
But yeah. But just thought to myself at that moment, I was like, all right, well, I should do something. What can I do? I don't know. For some reason, shoe cleaning was the first thing that came up. But I think that's interesting, though, that you mentioned that. And also a really good lesson to choose one thing and be good at it. Also kind of going through that right now, too, with my businesses. Just I've got like 3 or 4 that I could run very well, very successfully, most likely. And it's a matter of choosing. And I think that's I think you hit the nail on the head with that one, as far as just being consistent, getting good at one thing, and pursuing that.
You know what's interesting? There's a book called Good to Great, and it's kind of like a business classic. And I'm getting my books confused. The One Thing, rather. And, you know, it's, simply put, it's like really landing on the one thing you're good at, right? Like the one thing you do really well, and then focusing on that, right? Now there's in a business, even as you grow, I mean, there's always temptation to bring this thing into the business and, you know, add this on to the business and take on this new service. I mean, even for us, like, you know, security wasn't an option for me until it came onto the network, because I didn't know security. And quite frankly, I didn't know security when I started doing it. I had to learn it, right? But like fundamentally, it was now on the network. And so to install a security camera meant that I was already going to do the same thing I was doing, which is run a data cable to it, terminate that cable, plug it into a switch, mount a camera to a ceiling or a wall, right?
Right.
I mean, that's not hard. That's a very natural transition, right, to add something new into the business. But then it's like you get these wild ideas where it's like, we're going to add something totally off the wall. Like, don't do that, right? You know, stick with what you're good at. And so it's like you need to kind of identify your strengths in that sense. And I don't think it changes, right? certainly in a business you want to do that, but even in life, it's like, what are the things I'm good at? What are the things I feel like I can have success with? And then angling toward your strengths in that regard. And so,
Yeah.
I think that's important.
For sure. For sure. Okay. Well, just yeah. Okay. You kind of, sort of, maybe mentioned it as far as having to learn security on top of what you had already known. But what was the biggest challenge in starting your business?
It's interesting. At the beginning, dude, there were no challenges. I mean, there's
Well, that's great, right?
I should. The biggest challenge has always been people.
Okay.
Always, dude. I mean, it's like when you're good at the trade, you're good at the trade. I mean, you know what you're doing.
Right.
And when you do good work, people call you.
Yeah.
That's the easy part, bro. In fact, I tell people this all the time. Like, listen, it's not about can you do the trade. It's not about can you do the work. Like that, of course, that's the thing you do. It's about like doing really when you start a company, most people think there's like the work itself, and they think that's the company, and it's not. Like the company that's about 10% of what a company is, right?
Yeah.
It's being a business person.
Right.
That's the whole other 90%. And so, most people, and I think it's probably a mercy of the Lord to be naive in that sense, because then maybe you wouldn't do it. Like if you really understood the full orb of what you were getting into, you probably, I don't know if most people would do it. Right?
Yeah.
But it's like naively, you just think, I can do this thing and I can do it well, so I'm going to do it. And you go do it. And then you realize, I've got to be a business person. I've got to learn all these other aspects of what it is to do this. It's not just go out and do the work. That's actually the easy part.
Yeah.
That's the comfortable part, right? That's the thing that we've done for, a decade or more. So we could do that in our sleep.
Right.
But honestly, also, that's the thing that fundamentally makes you successful, is doing the work really well, right? And so in my opinion, the challenge is not the work. It's actually learning how to be a business person. And then that's like 100% compounded by people, right? And because the reality is you're limited, in growth by your ability to bring people in, or lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
And coalesce them into a team,
right?
And then give them direction and leadership, right? And the reality is it takes a long time to really shepherd people and to get them to where you want them, and it takes a lot of patience. And you could give it time, you could give it patience, and there's still no guarantee that person's going to work out, right? And so in my business, I've brought people in where I thought this guy is going to be with me for the next 15 years, like we're going to build this company together.
Yeah.
And not a single one of those guys is still with me. Not a single one. But why? And here's the thing, I've really identified in my industry at least 3 types of people. Everyone gets put into one of these 3 categories. The guy who shouldn't be there, the guy who's going to show up and give you a solid 8 to 10 hours a day and just crush it for you, but work is just a means to an end, and they really don't want to be bothered beyond their 8 to 10 hours a day. They might give you a weekend every now and again, if you need that.
Yeah.
But then you got the third guy, which is Mr. Ambitious. Now the thing about Mr. Ambitious is they can be the most amazing employee on the face of the earth, or they could be the most detrimental employee on the face of the earth, right? For a whole bunch of reasons, because that ambition gene, it brings all kinds of baggage with it, right? And so it's about really like learning to identify people where they, at least in my mind, where they fit in those categories, and then shepherding them accordingly, right? And saying, okay, this guy's solid. He wants to come to work every day. He's going to do a good job. Let me just do my best to make his 8 to 10 hours, right, as fulfilling as they can be, and give him as much responsibility as he wants, but not too much, right? And then it's Mr. Ambitious. It's like, how do I actually, like, take that and set a good trajectory for it to where, because here's the reality, like, you want Mr. Ambitious, absolutely, in any business.
Yeah.
But the problem with Mr. Ambitious is they're ambitious, and so they're going to always be looking out for number one, right? Which in their mind is them. They're always going to be looking for the next opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? You might put 4 or 5 years into a guy, and then he just says, hey, you know what? I've got a better opportunity.
Yeah.
And think about from business owner's perspective, that's a ton of investment from time, from capital, from everything, right?
Totally.
Not to mention what they could possibly take with them when they go, namely
Right.
customers, right? And so now again, if you